Will you be remembered after you're dead? The Z-list Deadlist podcast about obscure people from history with me, Izzy Lawrence.
Hello, welcome to the Z-list Deadlist. I'm Izzy Lawrence and I've been thinking an awful lot about apocalypses recently. Not sure the reason why. Possibly the same reason as I haven't put out an episode for over a year. If you found this, by the way, it either means one or two things. One, you take a risk, you click on a link and I like you. Or it means that you are, deep down, a little podcast archivist. That's right, you like to keep things and you put them on the shelf and you make sure they're safe and okay. And you're not going to delete your subscription just in case it might update and you need to get your book down and have a little rummage through and go, oh, I didn't know that. Well done. Your persistence or lack of, cleaning has paid off because I am updating this. Hello! Like I say, I've been researching the apocalypse. Previous falls of civilizations are interesting to me, particularly in times that we've been going through. I'm being overly dramatic. What we're going through isn't like the Bronze Age collapse. Not quite yet. Or it's not really like the Mayan either. Or indeed the loss of Doggerland underneath a tsunami. It's not quite that bad as yet. I'm talking obviously about the COVID crisis, social media, the falling of democracy, the questioning of all the systems, and the fact that I'm not sure how we're going to pay for it all. That uncertainty, that sort of anxiety that we have, and the sort of almost longing for the 1990s where things seemed a lot more simple and we could all agree on what truth was. That sort of change that we're going through, it doesn't feel like it's the end of everything. It feels more like a crisis. We're going through a crisis. And weirdly, if you Google general crisis, you will find one particular time period popping up, and that is the 17th century. It depends where you are as to what the 17th century means to you, but pretty much throughout the world, weird stuff was happening. First of all, you have the big scary one. You have climate change, because there was a mini ice age which went through this entire century, which is bad, because you've got volcanic eruptions happening, which they think might have caused it, which obviously means crops fail. This is what happened in the Bronze Age, by the way. A lot of crop failure, a lot of people moving around, a lot of people attacking each other to try and get food. And yeah, it was a bad old time for that reason. And also, it's just not nice. It feels chilling, when you're literally chilling. Throughout the world, you have civilizations slowly starting to sort of crumble a little bit, things being questioned. Like in China, the Ming dynasty collapses. You've got uprisings and wars happening in Japan. You've got the 30 Years' War. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth just randomly had a load of uprisings and disappeared for a time. It was a really sort of scary time. Obviously, the Spanish Empire as well going through it, with uprisings happening in Portugal and Catalonia, and all sorts of things are happening in this particular time period. A lot of, historians blame this on anti-bureaucracy feeling as well as the sort of pressure of food. Plagues were obviously happening. I mean, if you're an English school kid, one of the dates that you will remember is 1666, because that is the big fire of London, which is, I think, slightly wrongly credited for wiping out plague in London. It probably helped burning all of the fleas away. But the last great plague in London was 1665, which killed 100,000 people, which was a quarter of London's population in that year. So I know we've been through it this year, but that's a lot to go through. And it isn't like we had the population to spare. We're going to go really Anglo-centric now, by the way, because that is where I'm from and that is the history I know. So if you don't know much about the 17th century, buckle up. The main things that you will know if you're English and you're not really a history person in the 17th century is you've got the end of the Elizabethan era, that's Shakespeare and all that. Then you've got King James, who comes down from Scotland. Scotland and England share a monarchy now. They don't really share great politics, and the Catholics don't like King James, so they do the gunpowder plot. And of course, the gunpowder plot fails. Remember the 5th of November. We've all seen V for Vendetta. So that all happens. There's a great big anti-Catholic feeling. There's also a great movement towards, because this is the King James Bible comes in. He's the guy who writes it. So everybody's starting to read more. Pamphlets are coming in as well, and people want religious freedom. That's all happening. They're also really scared of Ireland because Ireland's Catholic, and there's this huge, what do we do with the Irish uprisings and that sort of thing. There's a huge, big difference between the men sent to Parliament and the men representing the king, and eventually there's a civil war. And the civil war is is basically 3 wars. I'm not going to go into it, but you've got people murdering each other. You've got brother against brother, father against uncle against nephew. It is a nightmare. 100,000 people die in that. And when I say people, I mean men fighting. More people die because obviously when you're fighting each other, you can't get the crops in. Houses are being burnt down. Disease is rife. So, loads of other people are dying as well. We're not sure how many. Probably another 100,000 in England alone, plus all the people you have in Scotland, plus all the people you have in Ireland who are massacred as well. And massacres, it's not just the Irish who are massacres. I did a gig once in Burford, right, where they celebrate, weirdly, the massacring. They're not celebrating as in going, yay, this was a good thing, but the Levellers were killed in Burford by the man who became Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell. He murdered all of these people who wanted representation in Burford, which is a lovely posh town. So I was there trying to do a gig in front of a load of people dressed as massacre victims. It was weird. Not the oddest, most difficult gig I've ever done, but a weird one. Anyway, so you have Cavaliers, Roundheads, Cavaliers for the king, Roundheads for Parliament, and they go at it. Eventually, the king is beheaded. The king. This hasn't happened before. This is way before the French Revolution, and that's another thing, France is going through, I think it's called La Fronde, where loads of, French people are uprising. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We're focusing on England. So the king of England has his head cut off. I've always been very pro-Roundhead because I'm always about representation of the people, quite Protestant and Methodist in my own little ways, so I'm not really into the sort of flouncy Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen Cavalier attitude. But the king, when he's put on trial, this sort of show trial they have in Parliament, and he's just like, now I think you'll find that God made me king, and that gives me the right. God made you what? A farmer? I'd like to see you cut my head off because that's hilarious. I don't even care. He wasn't cowardly at all. Like, he wore 2 shirts on the scaffold because he didn't want to be seen to be shivering, because he didn't want people to think that if he was cold, he was shivering because he was scared. He wanted to be, hey, no big deal, no big deal. So he got his head cut off, which still happened. I mean, this is the weird thing about the 17th century. There is a period of a decade where there is no king, there is a Lord Protector, so nobody's really sure what's going to happen when he dies, and there isn't really what happens. Eventually the army just goes, we're not letting your son take over, Oliver Cromwell. That's a bit odd. We'll reinstate the other king. So that's what happened. But nobody's really sure what's going to go on. Maybe there should be more, ballots and parliaments and that sort of thing. How interesting would that be? And at the same time, you have all of these people sort of going, well, if we don't have a king anymore, maybe we should build up a different sort of parliament, maybe. And they start using pamphlets in a big way. This is before newspapers. So newspapers come in towards the end of the century. So really, you've got, imagine the internet, but without any BBC or CNN or MSNBC or whatever it is that you listen to. Imagine there's no authority. It's just guys, it's just message boards, and it is just pamphlets and people going around. Like, there's huge conspiracy theories at this time. There's Titus Oates and the Popish plot making stuff up about things that he overheard. Also, it's not just like the people, the gentlemen who are doing this. It's, Matthew Hopkins is going around the countryside during times where there isn't much oversight on witch hunts. At the same time, I mean, we talked about Goodwin Wharton, who was the Lord of the Admiralty and believed in fairies fully. You have Isaac Newton coming up at this time, great scientists who also believed in alchemy and the fact that he thought he could make gold from nonsense. You have amazing writers. You've got John Milton at this time. You've got Jonathan Swift. You've got great diary keepers like Samuel Pepys, who loved his cheese. You have the Royal Society being founded at this time in the 1660s. You can sort of sense the unease that they're going through. They don't know what the future's going to look like. And I think we can all sort of agree with that. So there's this nostalgia for the past. I think there's a huge nostalgia now for the 80s and 90s and sort of times when things were a bit simpler, when there wasn't the social media and we could all agree on what truth is. And that feels like the anxiety that we're going through now with the plagues, because they had the plagues. 100,000 people died in London in 1665. There's this sort of, where are we going? What are we doing? And I feel there is that instinct when you feel like that to have the nostalgia for the past. I think that's what motivates our hero today, because I'm going to be talking to you about a man called John Aubrey, who I identify with quite a lot, mainly because what he did was he saw how much the world was changing and how much of it was disappearing in front of him. And he thought, I've got to preserve this. I've got to remember the people. I've got to remember the science. I've got to remember the little knickknacks. And he tried to preserve it all, and he tried to preserve it for us. And he did so in such a scatterbrained, beautiful way that we can all appreciate it. One of his quotes is, "How these curiosities would be quite forgot did not such idle fellows as I am put them down." And as one who identifies as an idle fellow, I think that you might find some comfort, as I do, in John Aubrey and how his scattered life makes some wonderful sense due to the time he grew up in. Here I am, a couple of years ago now, at the British Museum, introducing an audience to John Aubrey whilst trying to make them giggle.
In between these people talking about their Z-listers, I will also be introducing you to some Z-list people and also some quizzes. That's right, we're going to have a competition. And what does competition mean? Disappointment, correct. So, what I thought I'd do is I'll tell you a bit about my research into this. It's nearly 2 years ago I got given this book, okay? It's a bloody lovely book. I got given it for Valentine's Day by my boyfriend. Yeah, boyfriend, fuck off. Some blokes that go, what? Somebody wants to kiss David Lynch? Yeah. This book my fella gave me, and it's a brilliant book. It's by this man. His name is John Aubrey. It's called Brief Lives. Give me a cheer if you've read this book. Woo! Yes, some people have. Awesome. If you don't know, John Aubrey was basically what I am. He kind of did all right at university, but the Civil War got in the way, stuff. And he basically got left a load of debts by his dad. He spent his time on the run from his debtors and spent the last 20 years of his life sofa surfing amongst his friends. And all this time he had this brilliant ambition, which was that he's going to write a who's who for all the people that he knew alive at his time and who died just recently. So this was his big project. Unfortunately, he was insane. So, and I say insane, like his best friend describes him, right, as he was a shiftless person, roving and maggotty-headed. And sometimes a little better than crazed. So that's the sort of level of person you're thinking of. He basically used to write on the margins of Bibles, he used to write on old receipts, he used to write, if he had wet wipes, he'd have written on those, okay? He was very disorganised, but what's lovely is he doesn't write about people in the way that other people are interested about them. For example, there are famous people in this book. Christopher Wren is in this book, okay? He's quite easy to find because he's right at the back. WC. And now, this is the most important fact about Christopher Wren. Very little about his architecture, right? Christopher Wren has put a trick on us, as it seems, for he has made himself a year younger than he indeed is. Little nuggets of history. I've got a really nice bit about Descartes. Now, what would you want to know about Descartes? Descartes is one of these amazing people from here, most amazing thinker of his age. What do you think John Aubrey thought was important about Descartes? Yeah, his stationery. So, here we are, René Descartes. He would draw out a little drawer under his table and show them a pair of compasses with one of the legs broken. And then, for his ruler, he used a sheet of paper folded double. Facts like this make me very happy. There are, of course, people you haven't heard of in here. Let's go with, here we are, Samuel Foster. From Mr Bees, the watchmaker, his nephew, Mr Samuel Foster. Now, we've never heard of Samuel Foster. Samuel Foster, for the rest of us, it's just a name. Maybe you know him, maybe you went to the pub with him. Samuel Foster could be you guys, okay? This is the sort of thing. Only fractions of your life will remain in history, and this is Samuel Foster's. He's a professor at Gresham College, London, where in his lodging, on the wall of his chamber, is, of his own hand drawing, the best sundial I do verily believe in the whole world. Among other things, it shows you what a clock it is in Jerusalem, Grand Cairo, etc. It is drawn very skillfully. And it's that sort of thing that you can expect your legacy to be in the future.
Now, obviously, when I'm on stage, I'm oversimplifying. John Aubrey it wasn't his life's ambition to create a who's who. What he really wanted to do was create Wikipedia back in the 17th century, which was an impossible task. Impossible for any man, let alone a man so scatologically brained and so lacking in direction as John Aubrey, because he was a magpie. If something was shiny, he went after it. Oh, look, here's some stones. Oh, look, here's a new theory. Oh, look, who's that? Can I have those letters? Thank you very much. And so Brief Lives was collated well after his death. I've actually got the original copy of Brief Lives, the first publication of Aubrey's Brief Lives, which isn't what you think it is. It does contain some of his little mini autobiographies, but it's mainly a collection of letters that he collected and preserved to keep, because his collections are all in the Bodleian Library and the Ashmolean as well, I think. And they're just all of this random sort of, stuff. Imagine Wikipedia without a search, function. That's what you're looking at here. And Aubrey, this original thing, which is 1813, it's a book that's falling apart because it's 208 years old. It is on my shelves. I don't know what I'm doing, archivists. I'm trying to keep it together. It's called, it's not called Brief Lives, it's called Letters Written by Eminent Persons. And it's actually collected with some letters that a man called T. Hearn has been collecting as well. And he's beginning of the 18th century. So he is writing to people under the reign of Queen Anne, who you'll know from the movie The Favourite. There you go. What I found in this, John Aubrey's letters, he's got brilliant things. Like, he's got two bishops writing to each other about the execution of the Duke of Monmouth, which was a really bad one. I love things like that because they're first-hand accounts of people who've witnessed an execution of a duke ordered by the king because he's a little bit too Catholic for the king's tastes. Just a little bit too Catholic. And he's like, oh, I'm a Protestant, and he's been living in sin and all of this gossip happening. And then this poor man who'd been paying, people, he paid the executioner, but then he gave some extra money to the mate of the executioner who would only get the gold if there were few slices to the Duke's head in order to get it off. And in the end, there was 4 goes, and the executioner's like, oh, I've given up, this is too hard. This poor man is on the executioner's block, and then the crowd's like, no, you got to do it, you got to kill him. And so the executioner goes, oh, right. And then he takes another 2 hacks with the axe in order to get his head off. And you're just like, how awful is that? It makes, but this is the time they were living in. That was in the 1675. And you forget how much of this, what we would call medieval attitudes, persists so late on. For example, one of the really superstitious beliefs that people had about the kings and queens of England is that and it was because of the idea of the divine right of kings. So it's the idea that God appoints the king and therefore imbues them with magic powers. I know, why not? So there's one thing which is really traditional, which is the idea of the king's evil, which is a specific disease which only the monarch can cure by touching you. And so people would gather around the monarch and physically want to be touched by the monarch. And if you got that, you'd be cured of your disease. And obviously, even people in the 17th century were incredibly sceptical of this. And T. Hearn's actually collected a letter and has included a little extract. What does it say? It says, the following is extracted from the Miraculous Oculius of Sunday, March 26th, 1643. And this is a lovely little quote about, did the people actually believe in the king's evil, or was it all just make-believe and they just liked like a lark? His Majesty caused an order, which had been signed and printed the day before, to be posted on the court gates and all the posts and passages into the city of Oxford, prohibiting all such as were troubled with the disease called the king's evil to repair to the court for the cure thereof, at the feast of Easter now approaching, or at any other time hereafter until the Michaelmas next. With respect to this miraculous power of healing, which had been claimed by all our sovereigns from Edward the Confessor to Queen Anne, the following account is given by Daines Barrington in his Observations of the More Ancient Statutes, of which he heard from an old man, witness, in a cause which was tried before him. He had, by his evidence, fixed the time of fact, by Queen Anne's having been at Oxford and touched him, whilst a child, for the evil. When he had finished his evidence, I had opportunity of asking him, was was he really cured? Upon which he observed with a significant smile that he believed himself never to have had a complaint that deserved to be considered as the evil, but that his parents were poor and had no objection to the bit of gold. It seems to me that this piece of gold, which was given to those who were touched, accounts for a great resort on this occasion and the supposed afterwards miraculous cures. Many curious particulars relating to this custom may be found in Nichol's Literary Anecdotes of the 18th century. How wonderful is that? I mean, the thing that I didn't know is that when you got touched, you also got given money. A whole nugget of gold when you're a poor kid. That's amazing. No wonder they faked the flu. I think what I'm going to show you next, we'll go back to me in the museum and just show you how flawed John Aubrey is as a man and as his own feelings get involved in the history.
Let's pick up, what would you like? Would you like people he hates or would you like people he likes? Hates, fair enough. We know the audience. Okay, how about my favourite of all of his hates, Richard Head. Well done, everybody. What I like about this is his name, he didn't go by the name of Richard Head either. That is just John Aubrey being a dick. Because it says, ho dick. He says, Mr Meriton, his true name is Head. Mr Bovey knew him. Now, the thing is, he always likes to put context of how he knows different people, but Mr Bovey isn't in the book. I think Mr Bovey is a euphemism. Mr Bovey knew him. He was a bookseller in Little Britain. He had been amongst the gypsies. He looked like a knave with his googling eyes. He could transform himself into any shape. He went bankrupt 2 or 3 times and was at last a bookseller. He maintained himself by scribbling. There you go. Poor Mr Meriton, that is all you'll ever find out about his entire life. Good.
That's what I love about John Aubrey, okay, is the fact that he's so flawed. He is judgmental of people. I mean, really judgmental of people, as well as so self-aggrandizing, it's cute. So, for example, he writes his own little insert into history. So this is how he talks about himself in the third person, obviously. John Aubrey, 1626 to 1697. I don't think he wrote 1697. I think that was the editor of this book. I've got was it Richard Barber's edition? So this is 1975 original. No, this is just a 1983 copy. So sharp is he? Anyway, so John Aubrey. This is him writing about himself. His life is more remarkable in an astrological respect than for any advancement of learning. You know, here he is writing about himself, equal to the people like Boyle and, to be fair, Mr Meriton. But also he puts himself down at the same time, saying the only thing remarkable about him is the fact that the stars were so ill-aligned when he was born. He's been labouring under a cloud of ill directions for his escapes of many dangers and journeys both by land and water for 40 years. So he's 40 years old when he was writing it. And he does get on a lot of boats that sink, even though he doesn't really go anywhere. The furthest he goes is France, even though he keeps writing about how he wants to go to Italy. He never does, bless him. When a boy, he ever did love to converse with old men as living histories. He cared not for play, but on play days he gave himself to drawing and painting. At 9, a portraiteur. So, you know, he's really, you know, self-aggrandizing, but at the same time, he's just useless, and it's so sweet. I mean, and he just gets left a huge amount of debt when his father dies. So he's left, I think he's got £1,800 worth of debt that his father owes, and he owes his brother a further £1,000 inheritance that's in his father's will. So he's like £2,800 in debt. And that's the equivalent of now is a hefty amount, and he just never gets out of it. Throughout his university, he's constantly called to the Civil War to fight for the Cavaliers, and he constantly complains of having to speak with soldiers who are just ruffians and they don't understand good. That he just loves to be immersed among gentlemen and to listen to gentlemen's talk. I think actually I'm going to put this one down for a second. I was going to read to you about him bitching about other people. Let me find it. So this is what year are we looking at? It's written in Michaelmas, 1659. So this is just before, or just as the king is reinstated because Parliament rejects the second Lord Protector of England, which turns into an inherited thing. It's very odd. So when there isn't a king, there's a Lord Protector of England, which is Oliver Cromwell, who didn't really want to be Lord Protector of England, but didn't stop him. But he's talking about going to Mr Harrington's Rotary Club. I think it is. Let's have a look. What's it called? The Rota Club, not Rotary. It's a coffee club. This is him saying this. I am an auditor or a listener at Mr Harrington's new Rota Club, which is a coffee club that meets every night at the Turk's Head in New Palace Yard at one Mr Miles's house next to the stairs. Here there is an oval table with a hole cut in the side for Mr Miles to stand and serve the coffee, which is basically Mr Miles has invented a Starbucks bar. It's a coffee bar. It's lovely. These meetings are a forum for exchanging Republican views, and the discourses I have listened to at them are the most ingenious and smart that I have ever heard or expect to hear. This is a couple of years, though, before he joins the Royal Society. But it's so sweet. At our meetings, we have a formal balloting box, and we ballot about how things should be carried by tenetums or experiments. The room is crammed full every evening, as full as it can be, with gentlemen diverting themselves with philosophical or political discussions. I mean, it really is like, oh, I found this forum on Facebook. You know, I think it changes him. This is a lovely thing, which just shows how thinking is changing, because there is nothing invented that is more fair and impartial than choosing by ballot. How amazing is that? This is all happening with Mr Harrington. And there's a lovely little aside here. I have often heard Mr Harrington speak of the late king at the Rota meetings, and with the greatest zeal and passion imaginable, Mr Harrington was so grief-stricken by the king's execution that he contracted a disease. Never did anything touch him so closely. So you have to imagine, this is a decade after the king's been killed, and it's the repercussions of that event are deep within the society. Let's not let him off. Let's prove to him what a sexist man he was, because he really was. This is one of my favourites. There are very few women he writes about, obviously, because women didn't hold much political power, and unless he could marry them, and there were a few he went after and failed, he wasn't very interested. One of the women, who I suspect might have rejected him, it just says, it's underneath Thomas Cromwell, who is a hugely famous man, is Curtin. Madam Curtin, who had a good fortune of £3,000, daughter of Sir William Curtin, the great merchant, lately married her footman, who not long after marriage beats her, gets her money, and ran away, which just shows what he wants to happen to women. Anyway, Eleanor Radcliffe is another one. The Countess of Sussex, a great and sad example of the power of lust and slavery of it. She was as such a great beauty as any in England, and had a good wit. After her lord's death, he was jealous. She sends for one formerly her footman, and makes him groom of the chamber. Can't trust your footman, you see. Footmen, they're just after your mistress all the time. He had the pox, and she knew it, a damnable sot. He was not very handsome, but his body of an exquisite shape, hence the arrows of love. His nostrils were stuffed and borne out with corks in which were quills to breathe through. About 1666, this countess died of the pox. Now, did this man really go around with nostrils that were stuffed and borne out with corks in which were quills to breathe through? What is that? This is why Anthony Wood said that he was roving and maggotty-headed. That makes absolutely no sense to us. Maybe if you are a 17th century gentleman, you can write in and explain why were his nostrils stuffed and borne out with corks in which were quills to breathe through. Why would you do that to yourself? Also, another one which I find deeply fascinating is he is a historian. He goes back into the past and he finds people. Now, one is this amazing man called Sir Edward Zouche, who was a Knight Marshal of the Household in 1618. So this is before John Aubrey was born, and he was basically I suppose a humorist, a drollerist, who entertained the king, King James. And I tried out one of Zouche's jokes that is written in Brief Lives on an audience, and they had the same reaction that I did to this hilarious little ditty.
So, Zouche, so get this, right? 7 Humber, Trent and Thames, and thy great ocean and her streams, doesn't rhyme, must put down Robson and his fires, or down goes Zoosh and his desires. Exactly, that's what I thought. But according to, John Aubrey, those 4 verses were spoken to King James, which made His Majesty laugh so hard that he was ready to beshit his britches. Next time I do a solo show, I want that on the poster. It is amazing. Okay,
I don't really know how to sort of end with John Aubrey. I don't think there is an end. Much like his life, this is going to fizzle out, this podcast, which I think is quite apt. Because John Aubrey doesn't have that sort of great, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then he made his big changing. He never really did. He was always involved in science. He was always going out and trying to get samples of moss, but at the same time being obsessed with astrology and wanting to know where the stars were and the exact people's birth time and dates and how this might impact, because this is a product of his time. There is no distinction between alchemy and chemistry and physics and astronomy. It's all one interesting bubble. Everything's interconnected. And his family and the politics of his own family gets in the way. There's a bit towards the end of his life where he refuses to talk to his brother, even though he's lost his job because his brother's been accused of being a Roman Catholic. He's such a product of his time. And he doesn't do anything monumentous, but what he does do is now open us all up to the stories and the life and the weird coffee tables that they had back in the 17th century, and they make it much more real. Like I say, I really recommend John Aubrey, My Own Life by Ruth Scurr. Brief Lives should be available, and you can literally dip in anywhere. So I've just opened Ruth Scurr's book to the year 1683, January, and this is the exciting thing that's happened to him in January. My mother tells me that she is 73 years of age. There you go. Very important. Oh, well done. See, this is the thing. When you want to sort of like seem, hey, you can open it anywhere and find something really exciting. The 1st of June, which year is this? This is 1676. On the first day of this month, I met Mr. Hook at Child's Coffee House in St. Paul's Churchyard after he addressed the new Philosophical Club within the Royal Society. We stayed until 11 p.m, eating meat and drinking chocolate. Interesting mix. I visited Sir Christopher Wren again with Mr. Hook and Mr. Hill. Mr. Henshaw and Mr. Holder were there too. We talked about petrifications of bodies, about plasters, about framing glass, staining marble, filigree soldering with bran, about printing stuffs and gilding stuffs, and about ghosts and spirits. And that to me is the 17th century in a nutshell. Everything is possible. Everything feels disruptive. And I think the 21st century might just be the same. You've been listening to the Z-List Deadlist podcast with me, Izzy Lawrence. Thank you so much for listening and finding out this little podcast. If you want to find out more about me, go to izzy.com. That is ISZI.com. You can obviously please do everything you can to share this with your friends, social media reviews. You can support me as well. You can donate to PayPal. I've also got a Ko-Fi account, which I will link to in the show notes. Other than that, though, thank you very much. Get yourself a copy of Brief Lives, because there is no better book for the loo.